Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everyday Kelly. My name is Kelly. Today, I wanted to do a video recapping all of the books that I've read in 2020, a 2020 book roundup. So I read 20 books this year. So that was 9 more than last year. Last year, I read 11. So I'll tell you a little bit about the book. I'll try not to give too much away. If you're concerned about finding out too much about a book, then I would just advise you to hold off on watching this video until maybe you've read that particular book. But I'll try not to give too much away, and I'll give you my impressions of the book, and then I'm going to rate the book out of 5. So the first book that I read was You by Carolyn Kepnes. So this is the book that was that inspired the show. So I did watch the show before I read the book, and I enjoyed the show so much that I decided that I wanted to read the book. So You is a psychological thriller, but a guy named Joe who works in a bookstore, and he becomes obsessed with a girl who comes in there. Her name is Beck, and he meets her there, and he basically goes to great lengths to have her in his life. So it's a book about obsession. It's a book about mental health issues, even. And all through the book, you see that characters are struggling with things that leave them, especially the character of Beck, that leave them open to Joe's influence. I watched the TV show, as I said, and I really enjoyed it. But I also really loved the book as well. Even though I had already watched the show and I knew what was going to happen, I still felt like it was really worth the read. I felt like the book felt more intense, and whereas in the TV show they try to make Joe a little more likable. I'm not going to get into comparing the book and the TV show, but I felt like they tried to make Joe a little bit more likable in the TV show, whereas in the book it feels a little more intense. He feels a little more threatening, and you kind of question his character a lot more than in the TV show. But overall, I really enjoyed it, even though I had already seen the show. So I give this book a 3.5 out of 5. The second book that I read was a book that I was wanting to get my hands on for some time because it's a little bit of an older book. And this one is called Time and Again by Jack Finney. So I love anything to do with time travel. Anything that's time travel related, pretty much, I'll read it. Or anything alternate reality related. I just really love that part of science fiction. So I was really happy when I was able to get my hands on a copy of this. So this book is about a guy named Cy Morley, who is recruited to join a covert government operation exploring the possibilities of time travel. There is an added element of mystery in this book as well, where Cy finds a letter that's half burnt, so he can't read the whole thing, and he goes back in time to try and find out what the letter means. So in the book, he goes back to 1882 New York City to try to find out who wrote this letter. So this book did come out in 1970, but it is considered to be a really great staple in terms of time travel books. And it's also called an illustrated novel. So not to be confused with a graphic novel, which we commonly know as more of like a comic book style. This is a novel, but it has some pictures in it. But the illustrations that are in it really complement the story very well, and it kind of adds a little bit to it. So if you like to read time travel books, then you kind of know that it's similar to, say, vampire novels, in that there's always a set of rules and explanations by which time travel is possible. So there's always some way that the characters are able to time travel. So I have to admit, at first, I couldn't really get on board with the concept of this book. I couldn't fully wrap my head around um, what the concept that made time travel possible in this book. But as the story grew, um, I just got into the book more and more, and it didn't bother me as much. So what I really loved about this book too. So for those of you who live in New York City or have ever been to New York City, um, I found the description of the city at that time really fun, and to kind of see someone navigating their way through, uh, the city at a different time was really fun. And I think that's what I like about the concept of time travel in general, um, is the possibility of traveling to a different place in time and experiencing something completely different, good or bad. This book, I give a 3 out of 5. So the third book that I read in 2020 is called The Secret of Magic by Deborah Johnson. So I think this was probably my favorite book that I read this year, in terms of substance anyway. So I work for a public library, and this was a book that I discovered while I was actually reading some items from the collection, just because it was in poor condition. And I know that they say you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but the cover looked really enchanting. And so I had to take it home with me. So it's about a young lawyer named Regina Robichaud, who works for Thurgood Marshall in New York City. She receives a letter asking for some help from the NAACP to investigate a murder of a returning Black war hero in 1945. So this takes place in the mid 40s. So the letter that they receive is signed by a reclusive author named M.P. Calhoun. So as a child, Regina was captivated by Calhoun's book that she wrote, and actually the only book that she wrote, called The Secret of Magic. So that was a novel in which Black and white children played together in a magical forest. And the book was a sensation. It was featured on the cover of Time magazine, and it was banned in the South. And then the author disappeared. So that's what intrigues Regina to take on this case. So with Thurgood's permission, Regina heads down to Mississippi to find this author and to investigate the case of this murdered war hero. But as she navigates the muddy waters of racism and relationships, she finds that nothing in the South is what she's used to. So I really love this book. It was one of those books that I didn't want to put down. The prose was very fluid, and it just drew me into the book. It was the type of book that stayed with me long after I finished it, and it really left me thinking about the characters and wondering, whether they are allies, and then you realize that it's just like life. There's a lot of gray areas. So I give this book a 4 out of 5. It was a really good book. So the fourth book that I read in 2020 is only one of 2 new books that came out in 2020. It's The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. So this is the prequel book to the Hunger Games trilogy, and it follows President Snow as he's a teenager. I saw parallels in this story as I was reading it to the Star Wars prequels, in Anakin's descent and transformation into Darth Vader. That's kind of how I saw President Snow's transformation. So as a teenager, President Snow, he kind of lives with his sister and his grandmother, and in kind of like a poor circumstances. and he's going to school and he's trying to study so that he can get a good place in a university, and you see the formation in this book. You see the formation of the Hunger Games and a lot of the things that happen that cause President Snow to become who he becomes in the Hunger Games. I feel like the second half of the book seemed to drag a little bit, but I was still invested in finding out what was going to happen, and I really enjoyed this book. I know that there might have been some mixed reviews. Now, it's not, of course, if you really love the Hunger Games, it's not as good as the Hunger Games, but I still enjoyed it. I think it's still worth a read, and it's a good complement to the series. So I give this one 3.5 out of 5. So the fifth book that I read in 2020 is a book called The Future for Curious People by Gregory Sherrill. This is the type of book that is really right up my alley as well. So it takes place in a near future where there are doctors called envisionists who can show you your romantic future with someone. So there is a woman. She becomes obsessed with this technology, and she keeps going back time and time again every time she meets someone to find out if that's going to be her person to be with for the rest of her life. Then there's also, in contrast to that, there's a man who doesn't really like it, but he's kind of being forced to go there and go through the process by his fiance because she really wants to know if they're supposed to be together. So this book really makes you think, if we had that technology, would you want to know when you meet someone if they're going to be the person who you're going to be with forever and the person that you're going to end up with? I thought this was a really fun, quirky book. It's kind of a romance with a twist. So this one I give 3.5 out of 5 as well. So the sixth book that I read in 2020 is another time travel story called Time Bound by Risa Walker. So this one is part of a series. And this is the first book in the series. So this was a book that I saw on Amazon. I was just looking at some of the Kindle books to see if there were any deals. I don't normally purchase ebooks, but I think I only paid like $1.99 for this book, so I thought I would give it a shot. I think it's a YA book. But I also wanted to buy it because it has this cool element to it. It's called Kindle in Motion, and where it includes like some arts and animations. So I really wanted to purchase the ebook just so I could have something different and cool. So I read this on my iPad with the Kindle app. And so this is a first book in a series called The Chronos Files. And I'm generally not a series reader unless the series is really good. But I did enjoy this one, and I might even read some more in the series. So it's about a girl named Kate Pierce Keller, who's a normal teen, until her grandmother tells her that she comes from a long line of time travelers. And so with the fact that anything that happens in the past continually changes the present reality, someone gets murdered. I'm not going to say who it is. I don't want to give too much away. There is a murder in the past, and so Kate has to go back to 1893 to prevent this from happening, or else it's going to change things in that present reality. It was an enjoyable book. I was anticipating a little more time travel. A lot of the book kind of deals with, and maybe it's just because it's a first book in the series, a lot of the book deals with Kate learning kind of like how to time travel and learning about the time that she's going to so that she's prepared for it. But it was a nice little story, so I give this one a 3 out of 5 as well. So book 7 is a book called The Sexton by Brian Callison. So Brian Callison is an English author, and he mostly writes like nautical seafaring type stories. So how I came to this book is one day out of the blue, I was thinking about a book that my mom had purchased at a library book sale, like a used book sale. And I remember the book because of the title. And I also remember the cover of the book very clearly in my head. I knew nothing about the book except what the cover looked like, but it was imprinted on my memory because it was floating around for so many years of my childhood. So I looked it up, and when I read the synopsis, it sounded like something that I would really like to read. So, in lieu of trying to explain the story myself, I'm going to borrow from the actual description on the flap of the book um, so that I'm not giving too much away. In 1941, the British cargo ship Highlander is torpedoed off the west coast of Scotland during a violent storm. She sank immediately with all hands, or so they believed at the time, as did John Herschel, the son of her captain, and now a shipmaster in his own right. Until 4 decades later, he is hailed to Strathclyde Police Headquarters to collect the recovered proceeds of a sneak thief's robbery, only to find himself confronted by a legacy which simply still cannot exist: his father's precious Sexton, the navigating instrument which could only have gone down with Herschel Sr. when his ship met its end. Yet, here it sits before him, in defiance of all possibility, secure in its original rosewood box, lovingly cared for, only recently polished, and most definitely not resurrected from any Atlantic grave. And so, armed with only scant information, John and his girlfriend Fran set off for the remote village in the far north of Scotland. With compelling skill, Brian Callison weaves together the last tortured hours of Captain Herschel's Highlander, and the evermore discomforting pilgrimage of the captain's son. Somewhere within that quiet, ostensibly friendly hamlet lies the answer to the riddle of the Sexton and the fate of a tormented ship's crew. This was another book that I really enjoyed. There's a little bit of mystery in there, history, adventure, tons of atmosphere because it takes place a lot of it takes place in the north of Scotland, which is very atmospheric. And even though sea-type adventures are not really my cup of tea usually, this story, I still really enjoyed it. The story is told in alternating chapters, so one chapter telling the story of the ship Highlander, and then one in modern day. I give this one a 3. Book 8 is called Kate Middleton, Our Princess by Irene Bell. What can I say about this one? Not the greatest writing. You won't learn anything profound. If you are a fan of the royals, it's nothing that you couldn't learn from looking at news pieces. Honestly, it just kind of seemed like the author just took information from news pieces to write this book. So I give this one a 2. Book 9 is a graphic novel. It's called In Real Life by Cory Doctorow. I don't normally read graphic novels, but I saw this one recommended online, so I thought I would give it a try. It's about a teen named Anda who gets into playing a massive multiplayer role-playing game called Course Gold online. It's a place where she feels she can escape online, be whatever she wants to be. So she meets someone online who turns out to be a poor kid who lives in China. And as his avatar in the game, he collects valuable objects in the game and sells them. She also learns over time of talking to him a little bit, kind of getting outside of the game, that he works in a factory, and she begins to learn a little bit about what other kids and teens face in other areas of the world. She has this desire to kind of help, but she doesn't know how to do that. It's not my usual reading fare, So I give this one a 3. Book 10 is called The Perfect Couple by Lisa Hall. So this is about a woman named Emily who applies for a job as a housekeeper for a widower named Rupert. She had some trauma go on in her life, so she sees this as a chance to really start over. Soon, there's a bit of a spark that happens between them, and he asks her to move in. His friends and his friends are very wealthy, so they think she just wants to be with him for his money. So they don't quite trust her. So this is a bit of a thriller. Is she who she says she is? Is what happened to his first wife? So I give this one a 3.5 out of 5. Book 11 is The Time of My Life by Patrick Swayze. So for those of you who don't know who Patrick Swayze is, actor, singer, dancer, Renaissance man, he wrote this book when he was sick with pancreatic cancer. He lost that battle, unfortunately, in 2009. And just a little tip about this book, he did read the audiobook version, but since the audiobook version is abridged, what I did is I listened to the audiobook and I followed along with the print version, so I didn't miss anything. I already knew quite a bit about Patrick Swayze going into this book, since I am a fan. But there were some details that I didn't know. Like, for instance, I knew he studied ballet because his mother was a ballet teacher, but I guess I didn't really realize how accomplished he was in it. And then what I also saw in it as well is, despite how many things he did in his career, he really was quite insecure. And you kind of get a sense of that by the way the book is written as well, because he seems kind of quite braggy. And I don't think I'm the only one who thinks that about this book, because I've read other reviews where people have said that, but it just comes off being a little braggy. But and I also didn't realize he smoked as much as he did. I think he mentions in the book that he smoked 3 packs a day. So I guess that was something I didn't really realize, but it's a good look at his life. And the one thing that I really did kind of enjoy, it was actually really nice to hear his voice on the audiobook, actually telling the story of his life. So that's just a little tip. If you are interested in this book, I would suggest listening to the audiobook, but since it is abridged and he does take a little bit of the extra details out, you might want to follow along with the print book. So this one I give a 3.5. So book 12 is a book called Blackout by Keith DeCandido. This book is part of the Buffy the Vampire Slayer universe. I am a huge fan of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, so I was wanting to read this book for a little while. So for those of you who've watched the show, the description will kind of ring a bell and will sound kind of familiar to you. It's about Nikki Wood, the vampire slayer who was a slayer in the 1970s. And as I said, if you watch the show, you would know that she's one of the slayers that Spike had killed. And also in later seasons, the principal of the new Sunnydale High is her son, Robin. So that's what the book is about. It's New York City in the summer of 1977, during the time when Son of Sam is still killing people in New York. And so Spike starts to follow and hunt Nikki, the vampire slayer. So we know how it ends. You still hope by some miracle that it doesn't. But I really like these kind of prequel stories. You see her son Robin in there, who later, becomes a character on the show. And so I thought this was really enjoyable. So I give this 3.5. Book 13 is Let Love Rule by Lenny Kravitz, another autobiography. I read this book in 5 days. It's not a super long book, but it was really good. I'm a Lenny Kravitz fan. Once again, I know a fair amount about him. Um, but, there are always little interesting things that you pick up when you're reading a book about someone, especially when it's a book from their point of view. So going into this book, I had no idea that it was essentially a volume one, because I was kind of more interested to hear some stories from his career, but you don't really get there in this book. Um, and I didn't really realize that until I was about halfway through the book. And, I realized that, okay, we're probably not going to get that in this book. Um, and then at the end, he does confirm it that there will be another book. Um, so this book is mainly about his childhood, his teenage years, young adulthood, up until he releases his first album. It is interesting when you know a bit about a celebrity and then you read a memoir like this, and it kind of fleshes out some of the details of their life. Like I always kind of just assumed that Lenny grew up wealthy because his mom was on a TV show. But according to him, that wasn't the case. And it wasn't even until he was a teenager and she got a show on the Jeffersons and they moved to California from New York and bought their first house. So that was something that I didn't realize. And the way that Lenny kind of describes this dual life that he led, kind of being a New York kid, but also kind of being a California kid. And like he was a skateboarder and he was a part of the California Boys Choir. These are all things that I didn't know about him. So like I said, I read this book in like 5 days because it was kind of a compelling read. So I give it a 4. So book 14 was A Time for Mercy by John Grisham. So this is the second book that I read that was brand new for 2020. I mostly always enjoy John Grisham novels. This is the third book to feature lawyer Jake Brigance from the book A Time to Kill. So this time Jake is appointed by the court to defend a teenage boy named Drew Gamble, who has been accused of murdering a local deputy. Most of the town wants him found guilty and tried as an adult. It's very cut and dry for them. But of course, as a lawyer, Jake sees that there's more to it. And all the other things start to kind of come to light. This was another book that I pretty well devoured. It was interesting to see where the storyline was going, if not a little frustrating at times. John Grisham's writing is so immersive, and I was initially prepared for the majority of this book to give it a 4.5, but I have to say I felt a little unsatisfied at the end. I was left feeling a little unsatisfied. That's all I'll say about it because I don't want to give too much away. So I give this book a 4. So book 15 is called Mr. Malcolm's List by Suzanne Allain. So after A Time for Mercy, I wanted to read something lighter and completely different. So I read Mr. Malcolm's List. You might have heard about this one. It's in the process of becoming a movie eventually. So I wanted to read it before the movie came out. It's a Regency period piece, kind of reminiscent of like a Jane Austen sort of book. It's about a girl named Selena, who's a vicar's daughter. She goes to visit with her friend Julie in London, where she meets Jeremy Malcolm, who is known to have this list of traits that he looks for in a perfect mate. Her friend Julie, who had been scorned by Mr. Malcolm, devises this plot, gets her involved in this plot to get Malcolm to fall in love with her, to get Malcolm to fall in love with Selena by having her pose as his perfect woman so that she can reject him. As you can imagine, things don't go as planned. It's a pretty light read, kind of cliche, Jane Austen inspired comedy. Reminded me a lot of Pride and Prejudice. But it's enjoyable enough. Uh, However, some of the plot points seem a little silly, but so I give this one 2.5. Book 16, Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. So this is about a woman named Chloe who suffers with chronic pain due to fibromyalgia. Uh, so she has stopped herself from doing a lot of things that she wants to do in life because she suffers with this chronic pain. So she decides to write a list of things that she wants to do to help her basically get a life. And so some of the things on the list are like ride a motorcycle, enjoy a drunken night out, travel the world with nothing but hand luggage, go camping. And one of the main things she puts on her list is to have thoroughly meaningless sex. So when she meets the new hot superintendent named Redford, she decides that he can help her with this list. When I read the synopsis of this book, I thought it sounded really, really interesting and unique. And I enjoyed this book. And I went into it knowing it was going to be a romance novel, but I thought it would be more like Time Traveler's Wife romance, not like a Harlequin type romance novel. And just meaning that it was a little bit saucier than I was expecting. Don't get me wrong, I have nothing against like saucy, like explicit romance novels. I've read them. I have another one on my list that's kind of like that. But it's just I wasn't expecting it. Now, there are some really good things about this book. I really like and appreciate that the main character is diverse. She's a woman with a disability, and we see how that affects her life. We all struggle with something like that, whether it's physical disability or a mental health disability, that's affected us. And I feel like that is really relatable. And also the main character, Redford, you find out some things about him. I think I would have enjoyed it a little bit more without the really heavy sexual references, I think. But overall, I give it a 3. Book 17 is called A Murder in Time by Julie McElwain. Another time travel book. It's about a character named Kendra Donovan, who is a star agent with the FBI. During an operation gone wrong, in which she uncovers a mole in the FBI, she's also wounded, mortally wounded. Once she recovers, she goes rogue and she travels to England to try to kill the mole. And she follows him to a place called Aldrich Castle, where she goes undercover as a maid in an early 19th century kind of LARP situation. One evening, while she slips into a stairwell, something happens and she is transported to 1815. At first, she's mistaken for a maid, and she then gains the trust of some of the people in the castle and winds up getting involved in a murder investigation that's happening on the grounds of the castle. And so she has to use her modern knowledge about limited technologies to help solve the murders. I enjoyed this book. I kind of felt like it was a little longer than it needed to be, but it was one of those books where it kind of also has a large cast of characters. And so as a result, some of them seem kind of a little interchangeable and a little difficult to remember at times. And because she's supposed to be a part of the lower classes and a woman, I kind of got a little tired of people always telling her, oh, you can't do this, and oh, this just isn't done. Like, I get it. Times were different back then. But I still thought it was an enjoyable mystery overall. Once again, this is a part of a series, and so I probably will read the second book in the series. I give this one 3.5. Book 18 is called The Secret by Julie Garwood. So this is a romance novel. And I read this one because I enjoyed one of Julie Garwood's other novels that I read years ago called The Wedding. So this is about two young women, one English, her name is Judith, one Scottish, who have been friends since they were kids. Judith goes to visit her Scottish friend as she's about to give birth, and she winds up falling in love with the clan laird. I struggled through a little bit of this book. I wouldn't really recommend it. If you're into romance novels, there are really a lot of other ones that you can read with better storylines. And it kind of seemed just a little all over the place to me and not very interesting. So I give this one a 2. So book 19 is another autobiography type book, Where the Light Enters by Jill Biden. I'm always inspired by intelligent and accomplished women, so I really wanted to read this book. Very light memoir that came out in 2019. It provided what I was looking for, which was to get a sense of who Jill Biden is. As I understand it, the idea of this book started out as anecdotes, and you can kind of really see that in the way that it's written. She talks a little bit about her childhood, young adulthood, when her and Joe Biden met and their life together as a family. The narrative kind of jumps around a little bit chronology-wise, but then she always pulls it back to the main story and the main point. I felt it to be quite touching and inspirational too, so I give this one a 4. And so we make it to the final book on this list, called The Perfect Wife by J.P. Delaney. The Perfect Wife is a book about a woman named Abby who wakes up with no memory of who she is. And you find out quite early on in the story that she's actually a very advanced AI that was created by her husband's company, her husband is this kind of tech mogul in the Silicon Valley scene, and he created this advanced AI of his wife, who is, we think, no longer alive. And so this AI, she has all of the memories of his wife, all of the personality, and you really go on a journey with her, kind of discovering who she is. And people don't trust her because she's not what we would consider a real human being. She's a machine. And you find out some things about her husband. You find out some things about her. She goes on this journey to kind of discover who she is, who this woman who she is modeled after was. I mostly enjoyed this book. It left me with a lot of thoughts on really what makes us human. Is it our thoughts? Is it our memories? Is it our ability to make decisions? And in the book, the author contrasts this very nicely with learning a lot about you learn in the story that their son is autistic, and the author has an autistic son, so he writes from considerable experience. He kind of contrasts that very nicely with the story of this woman trying to figure out who she is and what her place is in this world. I can't say that I was totally satisfied with the ending of the book, but I think that, if a book leaves you with questions and leaves you kind of pondering certain things, so I give this one a 3. Whew, we made it. 20 books in 2020. If you made it through this whole video, thank you for sticking with me. If you enjoyed this video, I would appreciate you giving it a thumbs up. And if you would like to see some more videos that are similar to this, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next one.